Melissa Brannon was born on April 12, 1984, in Texas. Shortly afterward, her parents separated, and her mother decided to relocate to a small town named Lorton, Virginia. It was a calm, quiet place that was well liked among families with children. Melissa's mother, Tammy, found work as an accountant at a local business and rented an apartment within a residential complex on the edge of town. The complex consisted of small apartment buildings, and one of the nicest things about it was the frequent events and activities that were organized for the residents and their children. These gatherings took place every Friday and on holidays, giving everyone the opportunity to meet each other, helping to create a close-knit and welcoming community. Melissa enjoyed living there. She was 5 years old when they moved, and she spent much of her time playing outside with the other children. She also loved joining in on the events because there were always plenty of enjoyable activities and tasty food. On December 3rd, the complex hosted a Christmas celebration in a separate building that contained several halls. Around 200 residents attended, sharing dinner in small groups while their children ran around enjoying themselves. At about 10 p.m., Tammy decided it was time to head home. She called out to Melissa and told her to fetch their jackets while she said her farewells to some friends. Melissa also asked if she could bring some chips home, and her mother agreed. A few minutes later, once Tammy had finished her goodbyes, she noticed that Melissa still had not come back. She began looking through every hall and even glanced into the hallway, but there was no trace of her daughter. Feeling uneasy, she started asking the other guests if anyone had seen Melissa, but no one had. With every minute that went by, Tammy's worry increased, and soon word spread throughout the neighbors that Melissa had disappeared. Many people began assisting Tammy in her search. They went through the building, checked outside, but Melissa could not be found anywhere. At last, Tammy made the decision to call the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at the complex. They quickly joined the search, going over the entire area thoroughly. By then, even more neighbors had learned of Melissa's disappearance, and over 300 volunteers were now helping to look for her. At first, the police assumed that Melissa might have wandered off outside and become lost, but as the search continued, this possibility appeared less and less convincing. The weather was cold and dark, making it unlikely that a young child could have gone very far. In addition, Melissa knew the layout of the complex, even at her young age, so the officers doubted she would have wandered away in a completely different direction. What made the circumstances even harder was that there was a large forest situated directly behind the complex, so there was always the chance that Melissa had somehow ended up there and become lost. The search of the building where the Christmas celebration had been held did not provide many results. Melissa's jacket was gone, but there were no additional clues that could explain her disappearance. The only thing that caught the officers' attention was an open window in the boiler room. They briefly considered that she might have climbed out through it, but even that appeared very unlikely. After being unable to locate Melissa, the police began questioning everyone who had attended the gathering. None of the neighbors remembered seeing her leave the building or noticed anyone taking her outside. Melissa's mother did not observe anything unusual that night either. The officers also asked whether she had ever experienced issues with anyone in the complex or had noticed anything strange, but Tammy reassured them that she got along well with everyone and there had never been any indication of trouble. The police also thought about the possibility that Melissa's father might have taken her, since this is common in such cases, but they confirmed that he was in Texas and could not have been in another state at that time. With no further leads, the police decided to widen their search. Some officers entered the forest located behind the complex, while others continued inspecting the remaining buildings. Even though it was already late into the night, hundreds of residents stayed outside helping the officers look for the missing child. Sadly, the search produced nothing. There were no signs of Melissa either in the forest or in any of the multiple buildings around the complex. At that point, the officers sent the volunteers home and chose to go door to door, speaking with every resident. Around 400 people lived there, and that night, officers talked to all of them. None had any idea where Melissa could have gone, so investigators requested they think back on anything unusual or suspicious that had happened around the complex, even if it did not appear directly related to her disappearance. That is when they received their first noteworthy lead. Several women mentioned that Caleb Hughes, one of the complex's maintenance workers, had behaved inappropriately that night. He attempted to flirt with them and made extremely crude remarks, despite most of them being there with their husbands. Hughes, who was 23 years old at the time, had also raised concern among parents. Many of them noticed that he seemed to be paying excessive attention to their children during the evening. After hearing these accounts, the officers returned to Tammy and asked whether she had noticed anything unusual about Hughes. Tammy recalled that during the event, he had come up to her several times, trying to start conversations about her daughter. At one point, he even offered to take Melissa to the restroom so Tammy would not need to leave the party. All of this appeared suspicious to the investigators, so they decided to question Hughes. However, he was nowhere to be found, so the officers went to his residence. Hughes lived only a few miles away from the complex, but when they knocked on his door, he was not home. Instead, his wife answered and explained that he had not come home that evening. The officers left but came back a few hours later. By that time, Hughes had returned and said he had arrived home at around 12:30 a.m. The officers quickly noticed that Hughes had left the complex roughly 2.5 hours before returning home, which was odd since his trip should only have taken around 10 minutes. Hughes explained that he had taken a longer route because he stopped at a store to purchase a pack of beer, but the officers doubted his story. First, a short stop still would not account for nearly 3 hours, and second, there was a state law prohibiting the sale of alcohol after midnight. Furthermore, Hughes was unable to provide a receipt for the purchase. The situation appeared increasingly suspicious, so the officers asked Hughes to hand over the clothes he had worn to work that day. This is when matters became even stranger. Hughes claimed that he had placed his clothes directly into the washing machine as soon as he returned home. Even so, the officers persuaded him to give them the clothing. To their surprise, they also discovered that he had washed his shoes. But that was not the only unusual detail. Parts of the soles had been cut away, and along with the clothes, there was a large knife sheath and a leather belt inside the washing machine. The officers asked where the knife itself was, but Hughes said he could not remember. Given all of this suspicious behavior, the investigators began to seriously suspect Hughes' involvement in Melissa's disappearance. They collected his clothing and sent it to the laboratory. When forensic specialists applied luminol to his shoes, the chemical revealed traces of blood. However, because he had already washed them, there was not enough left to obtain a proper DNA sample, making analysis impossible. Detectives returned to Hughes' residence and brought him in for interrogation. Throughout the lengthy questioning, Hughes stuck to his story despite the many contradictions and questionable evidence. He also claimed that he had no knowledge of who Melissa was, what she looked like, or what had happened to her. The officers knew he was lying because multiple witnesses, including Tammy, had seen him interacting with Melissa and other children that evening. But when the detectives confronted him with this and stated, "We know you are lying," Hughes calmly replied, "Prove it." Despite the suspicions of the investigators, they did not yet have enough solid evidence to arrest him, so Hughes was released. The following day, investigators intensified the search efforts, hoping to locate either Melissa or additional clues. That same morning, they also decided to speak with Hughes' wife without him present, and she provided an interesting detail. Apparently, their marriage had been troubled, and she did not trust him. Before Hughes left for the Christmas event, she had checked the mileage on his car and remembered the reading. After he returned, she checked again and saw that he had driven 12 miles. This information was vital for the officers for two reasons. First, it did not match his claim about a store trip that supposedly lasted 2.5 hours. Second, they could now estimate the approximate area where Hughes might have taken Melissa. By subtracting the distance from his house to the complex, they could map out a search area based on the remaining mileage. This led them to a region covering about 25 square miles. To cover such a wide area, the officers enlisted assistance from the military, called in helicopters and planes, and even brought in divers to examine local lakes and rivers. Around 400 volunteers also joined the effort. Melissa's father, who had flown in from Texas right after her disappearance, participated as well. Officers printed thousands of flyers with information about Melissa's disappearance, hoping to reach as many people as possible. It is important to note that just 5 months before Melissa vanished, another young girl had gone missing from the same town. Her body was eventually found, but the killer had never been identified. While the large-scale search continued, a team of forensic specialists was sent to the complex. As we recall, the only potential lead the officers had initially found was the open window in the boiler room. The specialists examined the spot and discovered something significant. Just outside the window, there was a faint adult-sized boot print, and similar prints led all the way to the parking area. There were no child-sized footprints, suggesting that the abductor had probably carried Melissa and placed her in a vehicle. The officers had already inspected Hughes' car but had not found anything useful. At this stage, the FBI became involved. They still did not have enough evidence to arrest Hughes, so they placed him under constant surveillance. A judge also ordered him to provide a DNA sample in case new evidence emerged. As investigators examined Hughes' past, they uncovered a disturbing history. He had been arrested multiple times dating back to his teenage years. He also had a record of alcohol and drug abuse and had been suspected on several occasions of inappropriate behavior with minors. Further investigation showed that a few years before the incident, Hughes had received a suspended sentence for stealing a car in a nearby county. When investigators dug deeper, they discovered that he had violated his probation, which caused the judge to change his suspended sentence into actual prison time. This gave the investigators a way to keep Hughes in custody, even if only for a lesser offense. Over the next weeks, the search for Melissa went on, but it brought no results. The difficult terrain only made matters worse. Much of the region was covered in thick forests, with a large river running through it. Then, about 2 months after Melissa disappeared, something unexpected occurred. An unidentified man contacted Tammy, claiming he had Melissa and demanding a ransom of $75,000. Tammy immediately notified the officers, and the FBI agents advised her to gather the money and arrange a meeting with the caller. They quickly organized everything, placing dozens of agents around the area while waiting for the alleged abductor to appear. Before long, 2 men approached Tammy, and the FBI agents promptly arrested them. It turned out these men had no connection to Melissa's disappearance. They were simply 2 local university students who had followed the news about the missing child and thought they could make easy money. Instead, they ended up receiving prison sentences. One was sentenced to 7.5 years, while the other received nearly 4 years behind bars. Once again, investigators found themselves at a dead end. They had a prime suspect but no concrete evidence, and still no trace of Melissa. In an effort to break the case, the detectives decided to re-examine Hughes' car more thoroughly using advanced forensic tools from the FBI. But there was a complication. The car legally belonged to his wife, so they required her consent. Fortunately, she agreed immediately, and the forensic team began their examination. First, they applied luminol, which revealed traces of blood on the driver's seat mat, pedals, steering wheel, and windshield. This reinforced suspicions against Hughes, but once more, they could not obtain a usable DNA sample from the blood. Next, the specialists searched the car for hair, fibers, and other possible evidence. But they faced another major obstacle. The interior of the vehicle was filthy. It was covered in dirt, trash, and dog hair, making it extremely difficult to locate useful material. One of the experts devised a plan to manually collect evidence using tape. He carefully went over every surface of the car, then sent the samples to the FBI's forensic laboratory. At first, they mainly discovered dog hair, which was not relevant since Hughes and his wife owned 2 large dogs. But then, the experts detected a different type of hair, dyed black rabbit fur. They soon learned that this was the same material used in the coat belonging to Melissa's mother, Tammy. To confirm the connection, the experts requested Tammy's coat and verified that the rabbit fur was identical. Investigators theorized that the fur could have transferred onto Melissa's clothing when she went to retrieve the jackets, or in other situations, since Tammy frequently wore the coat during winter and Melissa was always close to her mother. In addition to the fur, the specialists found a single light-colored hair that matched strands taken from Melissa's hairbrush. But the most important clue was still ahead. Numerous tiny red and blue fibers were found on the passenger seat of the car. Because Melissa had been dressed in a red and blue sweater and skirt on the night she disappeared, investigators needed to locate those exact items of clothing to confirm the connection. They spoke with Melissa's grandmother, who had bought the outfit, but she could not recall the specific store. Officers searched local shops trying to find a match but came up empty-handed. The forensic expert kept struggling with how to prove the fiber connection. One evening, while discussing the issue with his wife, she asked him to describe the outfit. After listening to his description, she suggested the clothes might have been sold at JCPenney, a large retail chain where she often shopped for their children. She even had a set of JCPenney catalogs from past years. She offered to help and started going through those catalogs, looking for similar items. After some time, while flipping through a Christmas catalog from the previous year, she found exactly what they needed. On page 11 was an outfit identical to what Melissa had been wearing when she disappeared. This discovery enabled the investigators to establish a stronger connection between Hughes' car and Melissa, as the fibers matched the clothes shown in the catalog. When the FBI contacted the company, they faced another challenge. The outfit had already sold out completely. However, the company proposed a possible solution. Since the outfit had been sold only through catalogs and only 7,000 sets were produced, they offered to give investigators a list of all buyers so officers could try to locate one of the outfits. The investigators began working through the list, which took quite some time. Eventually, they had a breakthrough. They found a man in Kentucky who had purchased the outfit for his granddaughter but had ordered the wrong size. As a result, the clothes had remained unused in their original packaging for an entire year. For investigators, this was the perfect solution. The man agreed to send the outfit to the FBI, and the forensic specialists got to work. This model had a unique feature. The manufacturer had created a custom shade of dark blue, coded 887, which was patented and not used in any other clothing line. After comparing the fibers from the outfit with those from Hughes' car, the experts determined that they were an exact match. This provided strong evidence that one of the 7,000 children who had received this outfit had been in his vehicle. While it did not absolutely prove that Hughes had abducted Melissa, the chances of another child wearing this rare outfit being in his car were almost impossible. As a final step, the expert carried out an additional test. He collected more than 100 similarly colored fibers from different kinds of clothing and conducted 7,983 comparisons with the fibers from Hughes' car. The results revealed only minor differences across all the samples, except for two sets. The outfit from the store and the fibers from Hughes' passenger seat were a perfect 100% match. This eliminated the possibility that another child wearing similar clothing had been inside Hughes' car. It had to be the exact outfit Melissa had been wearing. Even so, the investigators still faced a tough challenge. They knew the fiber evidence, although strong, was still circumstantial, even when combined with the blood on Hughes' boots, the blood in his car, and the other suspicious clues. But with no other options, they decided to officially charge Hughes with Melissa's abduction. The prosecution argued that Melissa was most likely dead, based on the blood evidence. The fibers from her clothing found on the passenger seat of Hughes' car suggested that he may have forced her to remove her jacket, pointing toward a possible motive. According to their theory, Hughes approached Melissa when she went to get the jackets as her mother had asked. He then lured her into the boiler room under some pretense, carried her out through the window, and took her to his vehicle. After taking her to an unknown location and presumably killing her, most likely with a knife, Hughes disposed of the weapon and hid the body. This would explain the long period of time he had been gone. Following the crime, Hughes attempted to remove the blood from his car and his clothing, even cutting off sections of his shoe soles that were badly stained. As a final step, the officers decided to conduct a polygraph test, hoping that combined with the rest of the evidence, Hughes might finally admit guilt. State law required either the discovery of the victim's body or identification of the murder location to file a murder charge. Since the punishment for kidnapping was far less severe, the investigators hoped Hughes might confess. The polygraph showed that Hughes gave deceptive answers to almost all the key questions, but he continued to insist on his innocence. With no other choice, the investigators proceeded with kidnapping charges. The trial began more than 2 years after Melissa vanished, and Hughes continued to claim his innocence. His lawyer attempted to undermine the circumstantial evidence, but the prosecution's case made a much stronger impact on the jury. After 8 hours of deliberation, they found Hughes guilty, and he was sentenced to the maximum penalty of 50 years in prison. From that time on, Hughes has remained incarcerated, still denying any involvement in Melissa's disappearance. The officers made several additional attempts to locate her body, but none succeeded. For years after the trial, a worker from an energy company discovered fragments of red fabric in a lake within the search area. Divers were sent in, but they failed to locate Melissa. 8 years after she went missing, her mother remarried and raised 4 stepchildren with her new husband. Even though she took his last name, she continued to use her previous surname everywhere in case Melissa was still alive and trying to find her. As for Hughes, his story did not end there. On August 2, 2019, he was released early for good behavior after serving just over half of his sentence. At the time of his release, he was 53 years old and has been free for several years since then. Melissa is still classified as missing, since her murder has never been proven. However, very few people believe she could still be alive after so many years. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe. We upload new crime case videos every night. Stay tuned and brace yourself for what's coming next.